Joining us now is Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell. Andrew, good to see you. We saw the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg yesterday, not so ironclad on the promised budget surplus, a bit of Costello-esque expectation management.
I think there's definitely some expectation management here, Laura, in the sense that even though some skim will come off because of the fires and the recovery and the government spending on that, commodity prices are much better than they were in the budget, so that he can get another couple of billion there, Josh Frydenberg. So we're talking about a $5 billion surplus, a $2 billion fund for recovery, but only $500 million of that in 1920. So realistically, he'd have to lose $4 billion from household consumption to end up in deficit. And there are fears that as the smokes envelop Sydney, people have stayed inside. There hasn't been the household consumption. But I don't think he's going to take a $4 billion hit. Now, of course, the headline figure on budget day is always the 2021 figure, the next figure. Yeah. And that was revised down from $11 billion to $6 billion in the mid-year statement. So, again, that's kind of touch and go. But all the signs I have is they'll just kind of get there. And obviously that's important politically because it's something to whack Labor with. They were always running up big deficits. Yeah. But it is really, I think we were saying off air, you were saying to me, does it really matter, $2 billion surplus, $2 billion deficit? Well, of course it doesn't, except politically.
Mm. So, I mean, the forecast, remember last year when it was back in black, the government's going to be back in black, and there was the picture of Scott Morrison in that black and white photo. That is still going to be achieved. There's no risk of that sort of...
Technically.
From memory, that back in black was referring to the last budget, which didn't end up back in black, actually. But, vaguely back in black.
We've achieved a budget surplus next year.
Yeah, so, I mean, look, I think they will get there. But there's enormous strain on there. So, again, they can say, you know, we're the good economic managers, but they can't really have the argument, we've got the fat and the surplus for disasters like this, because they won't anymore. They'll be very thin surpluses.
But is there also an expectation that the economy, and we've spoken about this a few times on this show, we have in particular, that despite the tragedy that's happened with the bushfires, it does lead to an injection in the economy with rebuilding, with, that basically taking place all throughout the country?
It does, but I think it's kind of offset by people losing their jobs, you know, by economic growth falling. But that's right. But so again, a lot of that's a government injection again, so that hurts the government budgets. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely a factor. Maybe it can balance itself out somewhat.
I think people are pretty sick of talking about climate change at the moment, but it is certainly on some MPs and ministers' minds. Scott Morrison was pretty quick to slap down Matt Keane yesterday, but certainly I would say moderate seat holders in, I guess, the predictable states are certainly concerned, at least how the government is selling their climate change credentials and to a lesser extent pushing Scott Morrison to do more. What do you think?
Yeah, well, what I'm hearing is even people on the right are concerned about selling. Selling seems to be... Everyone's in agreement on that. Even Scott Morrison thinks he hasn't done enough to sell it. But that's an entirely different thing, isn't it, from reducing emissions, taking real action. And I can't really see that happening unless there's a lot more political pressure and bad polling over the next few months, because Scott Morrison keeps talking about the $80 billion coal industry. He keeps thinking about Queensland. And
so does Albanese.
Yeah, well, that's right. So you're getting different language in different forums. So Scott Morrison saying, you know, our climate policy has to evolve on the ABC. And he's going on Ray Hadley on 2GB yesterday and saying, look, you know, we need to act on climate change by building dams and doing hazard reduction. Yeah. So it's kind of like, I mean, John Howard said to us earlier this year, you need a balance. Scott Morrison's used much the same language. And if you can pull off a situation as a leader at the moment where you can be seen to be addressing climate change and you could be seen to be addressing coal jobs, you've really nailed it. That's what Scott Morrison's aiming for. He hasn't nailed it yet.
So why isn't he then? Because, I mean, the figures are there. Emissions haven't gone down, but they haven't gone up in the last 5 years. They've sort of been flatlined. But investments in renewables are among the best in the world. So... per capita, I mean.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so why isn't that cutting through?
Well, one of the reasons it's not cutting through is I guess they haven't made enough announcements around it. Funnily enough, they're due to make an announcement with Matt Keane, the New South Wales Minister, a bilateral deal. Now, until all this calms down, this Morrison-Keane type war, they can't do that. So that's kind of putting a handbrake on them getting ahead on the issue too. And look, it's got to be a real concern for the Liberal Party that there seems to be something of a war between the state government, the state Liberals and the federal Liberals at the moment. You've got, I don't think Gladys Berejiklian's enamoured of Scott Morrison. I don't think Matt Keane certainly isn't. Andrew Constance.
When's the last time they did a joint appearance on the bushfires in the South Coast? It hasn't been for a number of weeks at the height of the crisis, but certainly hasn't been since then. And Gladys Berejiklian has been going down to the South Coast quietly doing that. The other thing is that Liberal states like New South Wales do have more ambitious emissions targets for no other reason that they see it as their own political imperative for re-election. But those two different political goals are disparate at a state level and a federal level.
Yeah, I think what you've seen out of the fires is you used to have this Victoria and Queensland divide on climate change and very stark. I think what you're seeing is New South Wales, because of the fires, going more the Victorian way than the Queensland way politically, except in areas like the Hunter, where Joel Fitzgibbon, of course, nearly lost his seat to One Nation.
But the South Coast and the Snowies to extent as well. Like, I don't think any of those people affected by climate change, affected by the bushfires, we're so much talking about climate change, they're annoyed at the national parks. They can't run their stock on national parks. They're talking about hazard reduction. So it's practical as well, but also, you know, it's a huge city-country divider, I think, about what to do about it.
There is, but internally it's fascinating too, because Scott Morrison's from the centre-right faction in New South Wales.
It's been fascinating for a decade or more.
Yeah, Gladys and Matt Keane are from the left, and there really is no love lost, as you say there. These guys don't get on. As citizens, we need them to get on with the recovery, so that's a concern.
It was like you said, Constance saying that Morrison got what he deserved last year to that fire-affected area.
Bit of green on blue, we haven't seen that since Lara went on air with Alan Jones through Turnbull, but anyway, interesting.
Andrew, thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
See you soon.